Hi, Doug.
Hi, Bob. How are you?
Good. Glad you're here. We've got about
Oh, yeah, it wouldn't be much without me today.
yeah, we'd have to vamp pretty good. I don't see you, but I'm not sure why. I'm in Branson, Missouri, so Tim will join us pretty soon. We've got 50 people waiting for you to start, and we'll probably end up with about 35 or 40 from what I can tell. I have not them because I don't think that they need to be involved in this. I assume you're doing a screen share?
Yes, I am.
I didn't know if you had a PowerPoint or what you were up to, and I'm always a little.
You want me to show it to you at this point?
Yes, sir, if you would, because it's kind of like I touch different buttons and all of a sudden it works, and I don't really know why. So
you've disabled my screen sharing. I'm getting a message that says the host disabled participant screen sharing.
Okay, well, let me see where I can go from there, because I've got share content, but I need to figure out how I do that here. So I'll press some buttons here and figure out how to do that. I think he says. Oh. Keep pressing the same button so it doesn't do anything I want.
I'm still getting the same message.
Let's see here, just a second. Or something that made me think I have an idea. There we go. It says share content, but I don't get anything that says share. That's what I'm struggling with. I don't know why. Oh, fudge. I'm going to make you the host. That way you can have it, I think.
Okay, now I'm the host.
Yeah. And if you are, then you're going to need to, at 2:58, go ahead and open up everybody. But I think once you're the host, that you'll be able to take over being the ability to share.
Okay.
What I think. But
well, let me get my PowerPoint up here and we'll take a look.
I'm running this off my iPhone, and it's been a very unfamiliar process.
Need two of them. All right, now I'm going to share my there.
In my present mode, I don't get to see you.
Now I've got my PowerPoint up and running.
I see what you've got. The Topeka Owls, Hawks, and Reds. So you have control.
Yes.
Which is great.
Okay.
and what that will need to do is when we get to about a minute, I'm going to need to have you go ahead and admit everybody. And let me see.
I've never done that before.
Okay. Well, I think it's a workaround is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. Well, I've got 22 people in the waiting room.
Yeah, that's it. And then you go.
Oh, admit all. Okay, got a button that says admit all if I want to admit them.
That's right. You might look to see if Tim Wrencher is in at this point in time. If he is, you should just admit him, and then you and he can talk because he'll be introducing you. And if he doesn't, then I will at the appropriate time.
I don't see his name here yet, but I think maybe I have to click on admit all in order to see all their names.
I don't think you need to, but that's.
I'm just seeing you and me as the only two participants, but then I've got three names there. I've got KG, I've got Jane and Kevin Grease, whose dad was a Peak Owl, and Ellen Gus.
And don't have the other. You don't have the other.
I've got 27 people waiting. It doesn't have them listed out.
Okay. Usually they do. I'm sure on another screen they list out all of them. You just haven't reached that screen.
Well, let me see.
This is live TV.
Yeah. Well, no, I don't see it. Can't figure out see them all.
Well, I'll tell you what. You give me back the problem.
I did draw that.
Okay. Well, you want to bring everybody in and.
I'll do it at this point.
Oh, you gave it back. You gave it back to me, didn't you?
I think you're coming on.
Oh, we've got 31.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good.
I think these folks are coming on.
Well, Tim is now waiting. Let me admit him.
Okay.
That doesn't look like Doug.
No,
Maybe that's Bob Totten. Maybe it is him. I bet it is him.
Well, he's got no.
It doesn't.
Our video saw.
Okay, I've got Tim should be in with us now.
Yeah, I'm in.
X, I just know then. There's Ben.
Hello.
Tim's Ken.
Kent Pellegrino, I know him.
I'm here.
Okay, I'm just gonna let you
Well,
go.
we're not gonna take roll, but it's good to see all of you.
So how do you get the picture? See Ben.
Yeah, you're there. You're up here. You don't have to read.
So Bob, we about ready to go?
Yes, sir, we are. It's all yours.
All right. Hello, everybody. My name is Tim Renter. I'm president of the Shawnee County Historical Society. Welcome to today's presentation by Doug Wright. I want to encourage everyone to join the Historical Society. It's $35 a year. That's the minimum price for a single person, or for a couple, it's a $50 a year minimum price. If you do that, you get some cool things that include a quarterly newsletter, stories about Topeka's history. Today, we're going to get to hear some of that history from Doug Wright. He's a member of the Shawnee County Historical Society. He's a history buff, a baseball fan, and he also happened to be the city's mayor from 1983 to 1989. Take it away, Doug.
Thanks, Tim. I think even more important than that history of mine that you just gave is that in 1961, I was the bat boy for the Topeka Reds. And so I have some firsthand knowledge of just the team at that time, but some of the players and the old ballpark and that kind of thing. So I think that's in part why I have been asked to give this presentation today. I'm going to cover 15 years of minor league baseball in Topeka from 1946 to 1961, but I'm going to primarily feature the Topeka Owls from 1946 to 54, largely because they were a Topeka team. And while all three of these teams were Topeka teams, the Owls were composed of many players who were from Topeka and the Topeka area, or who stayed around Topeka after their professional baseball days were over.
Why do we have?
If you ever mention the Owls, there's memories of that team and the players still fresh on the minds of many people around Topeka.
That's him talking.
No, it's
And
not.
if you want to learn about the 61 Reds, that was perhaps the best Topeka team in this particular area, I would cite you to a YouTube that I prepared 4 years ago when this team was inducted into the Shawnee County Baseball Hall of Fame. Just go to YouTube and search for 1961 Topeka Reds. The Owls played in the Class C Western Association. The Hawks played in a higher class league, the Class A Western League, and the Reds played in the Class B 3I League. And at first, the Owls were an independent team. They were not controlled by or working with a major league team. They were not a farm club of a major league squad. And this allowed the Owls to sign a lot of local ball players to fill out their squad. The last couple of years that the Owls played, throughout the time of the Hawks and the Reds, the teams had a working agreement with a major league team. They were a traditional farm club. So the Topeka Hawks and Reds, who played from 56 to 61, were mostly young professional ball players, not from around here, who were focused on making the major leagues. And while a few of the Owls players did play in the majors, for the most part, they played for the fans here in Topeka and for the love of the game. I've got a lot of photos. I got a lot of information about the Owls. I will be the first to admit that I don't know everything about this. I've got my email address on this on the slide. And I would encourage anyone who wants to provide me with any additional information, enlighten me about anything that I cover today, get a hold of me through my email, and I'll be glad to correspond with you. The Topeka Owls were born in 1939 when Peter B. Mitchell, a California businessman, moved his Class C Western Association baseball team from Bartlesville, Oklahoma to Topeka. In Bartlesville, they'd been known as the Bartlesville Chiefs, but when they got to Topeka, they decided that they needed a new name, and so a newspaper held a contest, and Mitchell selected the name Owls for his team because he said the Owls are wise, and Topeka's team must be wise to compete with the fast company in the league. Topeka had a baseball tradition that dated back to the 1880s, but they'd been out of baseball for 5 years, since 1934, when the Topeka Senators played in the Western League. Their games were played at the fairgrounds, which is now the Kansas Expo Center grounds. That was an unsuitable location to watch a ball game. So Mitchell needed a baseball stadium, and he built one in a few months at the southeast corner of North Topeka Boulevard and Lyman Road. And I've got a photo on there showing the ballpark, showing the old Topeka Boulevard with Lyman Road there going crosswise up at the top. Built his ballpark for $16,000 using lumber that he salvaged from the old city hall that was being demolished at the time. And in all modesty, he named the park Mitchell Park. And after World War II, the ballpark was renamed Owls Park. And during the time that the Hawks and the Reds played there, it was known as Community Park. It had a wooden grandstand that seated about 3,000 people under a roof, and it had bleachers down both lines. Mitchell's Owls were a success at the box office, and they drew large crowds of spectators. They even had people travel on the road to nearby St. Joseph, even took a band to support their team up there. And in 1939, the Owls drew 100,000 fans to the ballpark when their population of Topeka was only 68,000. They were not as successful, though, in the win-loss column, as they finished fourth in the league, and it caused a St. Joseph sports writer to dub Topeka the Brooklyn of the Western Association. I meant that as a compliment because the Brooklyn Dodgers were a major league team that drew huge crowds, but offered so-so success on the field. For example, in 1947, the Dodgers led the major leagues in attendance, even though they played in the second smallest major league park, Ebbets Field, that only seated 34,000 people. Mitchell owned the team for 3 years, and in February of 42, shortly after Pearl Harbor, while he was in California visiting his avocado ranch, he abruptly enlisted in the Army and abandoned his team, his manager, his players, his property, including his stadium, and abandoned the whole city of Topeka. It was written that he had walked away from a gold mine because in the 3 years that he owned the Owls, over 250,000 people had streamed in to watch him play. The Owls did field a team in 42, but they did not play in 1943, 44, or 45 during World War II. However, in December of 1943, the Topeka baseball franchise was purchased by a guy named Raymond Fido Murphy. He wasn't from Topeka. He was a self-promoter who claimed to have been a college football star. He wasn't, and he'd also umpired in the Western Association prior to the war, and no doubt he had taken note of the huge attendance numbers that the Owls put up. Murphy was serving as a chief specialist in the Navy physical fitness program at Quonset Point, Rhode Island, and he wired Topeka to let it be known that he had some players lined up to play when they traded. Among them were Byron Jakey Watkins, George McAfee, and Raymond Scooter McLean. They were best known, though, at the time as football players for the Chicago Bears of the National Football League. Fido Murphy was close friends with George Halas, who was the owner and coach of the NFL Chicago Bears, and he saw ownership of the Topeka Owls as a way to keep a few of the Bears players in shape during the NFL's offseason. So here was a time when the Topeka Owls were an independent team. They didn't have a relationship with the Major League Baseball team, but they did have one with the National Football League team. And Raymond Scooter McLean did, in fact, play for the Owls in 1947. That's him in the photo. And he would go on to play and coach in the NFL, and he'd be known as the answer to a trivia question: who was the football coach of the Green Bay Packers just before Vince Lombardi? Well, that coach had a 1-10 record, and that was Raymond Scooter McLean. After the end of World War II, minor league baseball expanded across the United States like never before. It was said that a person could leave home with a hot cup of coffee, drive in any direction, and find a minor league ball game before their coffee cooled. In 1946, there were 2 major leagues with 8 teams in each league, but the westernmost teams were in Chicago and St. Louis. Everything was focused in the Northeast. There were 43 minor leagues, so each of those leagues having 6 to 10 teams in it, from Class AAA down to Class D. By 1961, we still had the 2 major leagues, but the minor leagues had dwindled down to 21 minor leagues. And by 2019, there were only 10 minor leagues, and there are no longer any leagues below A. There were no B, C, or D leagues. So minor league baseball dwindled quite a bit. In 1946, when Fido Murphy, who had decided he was going to be the field manager as well, when he opened his training camp, he had so many players, he decided to field a second team in the Class D KOM League, which is the Kansas, Oklahoma, Missouri League. And so he placed his team in Chanute and the Chanute Owls. And in 46, the Chanute Owls finished first in the KOM League behind great pitching from Topeka's Lee Dodson and Ross Grimsley from Americus, Kansas, and the slick fielding of John Bulkley Jr. from Reading, Kansas. And in the photo, the tall guy is Lee Dodson. He's over on the right. Those are the pitchers from the Chanute Owls, and he's the one in the middle, the tall one. To his left is Ross Grimsley from Americus, Kansas. At the end of the year, Fido promoted these 3 guys, all local fellows, up to the Topeka Owls. And then he set up an exhibition game between the Chanute Owls and the Owls, and the Chanute Owls beat the Topeka Owls. And it caused the suggestion to be made that Fido had loaded the Chanute team with his best talent because he knew Topekans would support their team regardless of who the players were. In 1946, the Topeka Owls were a blend of mostly older veterans and 2 local youngsters. The average age of players in the Western Association was 23, Topeka's was 25. And these are the teams in the Western Association showing the major league affiliation that each of them had. Among the local players in 1946 was Bob Lee. At the time he was 20 years old. He spent 7 years playing minor league baseball. He'd been signed by the Yankees out of Topeka High School, and he played for the Owls in 1946, in 1949, and in 1950. Bob was also able to attend Washburn University at the time and still play for the Owls. Bob was able to coach baseball at Washburn, play football at Washburn, and he went on to have a nice career in real estate in Topeka. He just passed away a few years ago, but before doing so, we were able to induct him in the Shawnee County Baseball Hall of Fame. Another local player was Abraham Jr. Kaufman, who was a local pitching legend from his days playing Legion ball and semi-pro ball with Topeka's Decker Oilers. Fido signed 23-year-old Kaufman in late July to bolster his pitching staff, and Kaufman rewarded the Owls by pitching a no-hitter a few weeks later against the Leavenworth team. In that game, Bob Lee hit 2 home runs to support Kaufman's pitching gym, and this was the only year that Junior Kaufman would play for the Owls as he devoted his playing time thereafter to the Decker Oilers. Another member of the Owls pitching staff was Windy Johnson, and that's him on the bottom. On the top is Butch Neiman. Both Butch Neiman and Windy Johnson were managers for the Owls over the years, and I'll talk a little bit more about Butch Neiman in a couple of minutes. But Windy Johnson was a farmer from Burlingame, Kansas, and he pitched over 9 minor league seasons. He'd been with the Owls before the war, but in 46, he was 33 years old. And at the end of the year, in 1946, the team held a Windy Johnson Day at the ballpark, and that's where Fido announced that he was going to step down himself as the manager and allow Windy Johnson to be the Owls manager the next year. The 1947 Owls had probably the most talent and the most local talent of any of Topeka's minor league teams up to that point. Fido, as I said, had turned the managerial duties over to Windy Johnson, who pitched for the Owls and won 17 games. But the best pitcher for the Owls that year was Lee Dodson, who won 18 games and lost 4. This was the only year that Lee Dodson pitched for the Owls. Also on that team in pitching was Ross Grimsley from the Chanute Owls team. After his great 1947 season, Lee Dodson's contract was sold to the New York Yankees, where he pitched up to AAA ball. And in total, Lee Dodson pitched 5 years in the minor leagues before he turned to education, which is where I'm sure most Topekans were introduced to him. Or maybe you saw him at McDonald
That's
Field
right,
where
yeah.
he hung out organizing ball games until late in his life. Looking at the photos there on the right, the guy with the big windup, that's Lee Dodson. And he's getting ready to hurl the ball. And over on the left is Butch Neiman. I got to know Lee Dodson pretty well when I was at Washburn as a student, and he was the dean. Ross Grimsley won 19 games against 9 losses for the Owls that year, and that was the only year he would pitch for the Owls. His major contribution to Topeka baseball is probably his son. His son, Ross Grimsley, pitched 11 years in the major leagues for 4 teams and got 124 victories. And he was born in Topeka on January 7th of 1950. Another player on that 47 team was Bob Hegwood, who was from Moultrie, Georgia. And he played for the Owls in 47 and 48. He lived in Topeka for 43 years after his baseball career is over. And he recalled in a 2003 interview that most of the Owls players had jobs around town, and they earned $100 to $200 per month playing baseball, plus $2 per day meal money when they were on the road. And at age 29, this was the first year that Elmer Leroy Butch Neiman played baseball for the Owls. He would start in their lineup for 5 seasons in total, and each of those 5 seasons, he led the Western Association in home runs. Butch came from Herkimer, Kansas, and played football at K-State, earning the nickname the Herkimer Hurricane before he got into professional baseball. And he spent 3 years during the war playing for the Boston Braves and was usually among the hitting leaders in the Western Association. He was in a league by himself when it came to hitting the ball. After Butch Neiman and Lee Dodson retired from playing professional baseball, they were instrumental in establishing the Babe Ruth League for kids 13 to 15 here in Topeka. And I played 2 years for Butch Neiman's teams that was composed largely of kids from the Capper and Boswell schools. And we competed against Lee Dodson's Tecumseh teams. Great competition, a lot of fun. In 1947, the Owls finished second in the league, but they led the league in attendance against about 115,000 fans. And that was in 70 home games. Most of the seasons were 70 home games, 70 road games. And after the season, Lee Dodson reminded Fido Murphy that he'd promised to pay him a bonus if he won 15 games. Well, Dodson won 18 games in the regular season and 1 game in the playoffs. And Fido reneged on the offer. He said it wasn't in writing, so he wouldn't pay him. And anyone who ever knew Lee Dodson knew that he wasn't just going to let that pass. So Lee appealed to George Troutman, who was the president of the National Association of Professional Baseball, essentially the commissioner of the minor leagues. And lo and behold, Troutman upheld Dodson's claim. He fined the Owls $500 and he suspended Fido for 1 year. Fido still owned the club, but he couldn't participate in any of the management decisions. And on the newspaper clipping here, this is the all-star team from the Western Association for that league. You've got Lee Dodson, who was the right-handed pitcher. Ross Grimsley was the left-handed pitcher. John Bulkley Jr. was the second baseman, and Butch Neiman was in the outfield on that all-star team. On the right side,
We lost. You are on mute.
it took Fido about 2 months to decide to sell the Owls to a group of Topekans that included Mrs. Ethel Maloney as the principal stockholder, and the minority stockholders Lester Goodell, local attorney, Jerry Goodell's dad, by the way. And Jerry said that he thinks that Mrs. Maloney was a cousin of theirs. And the other minority stockholder was Link Norris. Mrs. Maloney, and that's her on the right. Mrs. Maloney was a self-described tomboy who grew up in a man's world and was a success in business. She was a part owner of a Topeka restaurant known as The Lounge. And she also owned a machine shop that produced parts for aircraft. And one time she owned a tire store. She was one of 8 ladies holding an executive position in all of baseball in the United States at the time, and the only one to have, quote, bought herself in. The rest of them all came in as the wives of their husbands. This is a photo on the right of the general manager of the team, Frank Silva, and Mrs. Maloney playfully decorating the Owls dugout. This photo ran throughout the country. It's so unusual for a woman to be owning a baseball team, and right here in Topeka. So Mrs. Maloney said she was proud to have come into baseball all on her own. She owned the controlling interest in the Owls for 2 seasons from late 1947 until January of 1950. Sold out her interest to Link Norris and continued as a minority stockholder. But don't worry about Fido Murphy. He moved to the West Coast. He became the West Coast scout for the Chicago Bears, and he married a movie star, Iris Adrian, who it was written specialized in playing hard-boiled gals, glamorous gold diggers, and gangsters' malls. And that's Iris Adrian there. One innovation the new owners brought to the local baseball scene was to have an organ installed at Owl Park. Ole Livgren, a popular local entertainer who played morning, noon, and night on WWW radio, and in the evenings at Mrs. Maloney's restaurant, was asked to play for the fans, and he did through the years of the Owls, Hawks, and Reds. A while back, I corresponded with Ole's nephew, Kerry Livgren, who's had a pretty good musical career as the founder and lead musician with a progressive rock band, Kansas. And I asked him if he ever went to games. He says, well, sure, my uncle Ole played the organ there. And I said, what do you remember about it? And he said, I remember running around under the bleachers looking for dimes to spend at the concession stand. What a lot of adults today remember doing as kids at these games. The 48 Owls were managed by Wendy Johnson and later by Butch Neiman. And among the local talent was Dick McConnell, Richard Palmami, and Dwayne Melvin. Dick McConnell was 18 years old. He was a 47 graduate at Topeka High School, and he went on to become the winningest high school basketball coach in Arizona history. His teams won 774 wins over 39 seasons. And he played with the Owls for 4 years while he was attending Washburn, where he started in both basketball and football. Richard Palmami, age 26, was a left-handed pitcher who played 5 years with the Owls. I don't have an individual picture of him, but I circled his photo in the team photo. I think that team photo is from 52. But he pitched for 5 years, from 48 to 52. He was left-handed. Richard Palmami was a Potawatomi Indian from Mayetta. And of course, during his playing career, his nickname was Chief. He was known as Chief Palmami in the newspaper and by his teammates. His best years with the Owls were 48 and 49 when he was 13-3 and 18-10. And then Dwayne Blackie Melvin was a multi-sport star at Celina High School, where he played 4 years of professional baseball. 1948 is when the Owls he hit 211. In 1954, as a final curtain call, the had one at bat. He went on to serve as the coach for 38 years at Meriden, Emmett, Robinson, Rossville, and Seaman High Schools. The Owls finished 4th in the league standings, earning them a spot in the Shaughnessy Playoffs. And Shaughnessy Playoffs were common in minor league baseball. Teams would play at the end of the regular schedule. The top 4 teams would have a set of playoffs, and those were called the Shaughnessy Playoffs. This is how the team finished in 48. So 1 played 4, 2 played 3, and a best 3 out of 5, and then the winners of those played a best 4 out of 7. Topeka took out the first place Fort Smith Giants, but they finished the year in 2nd place. But again, they led the league in attendance with 95,000 paying customers at a time when Topeka's population was 80,000. But as a testament to Topekans' love of baseball, before the 48 season, an exhibition game between the Cleveland Indians and New York Giants drew a crowd of 6,235, the largest attendance ever at Owl Park, although they did draw several crowds in excess of 4,500. The 1949 Owls finished the league in 4th place and again ousted the top seed in the Shaughnessy Playoffs. But again, they finished 2nd for the year. Topeka's attendance once again led the league with over 116,000 paying customers. Butch Neiman was still the manager, but he had 3 new local players, all 3 pitchers on his team, to draw on. They were Jack Dean, Ed Wilson, and Alex Greaves. John Jack Dean was born in Marion, Kansas, and graduated from Harveyville High School, where his father was his coach. And after he earned both an undergraduate and master's degree from K-State, where he played basketball and baseball, he joined the Owls. So he was 25 when he joined the Owls, and he pitched for them for 5 years. He won 19 games in 1951 and 53, 18 games in 52, the year that he was named in mid-season to be manager for the Owls. 53 was his last year with the Owls, and at the time, Dean was said to be the most respected ball player in the Western Association. At the end of the season, even the Joplin team recognized Dean and presented him with a gift piece of luggage, perhaps suggesting for him to hit the road and not beat the Joplin Miners anymore. He served as assistant basketball coach at Topeka High during his baseball days. And after he got out of baseball, he was the head basketball coach at Topeka High School and later at Celina South High School. Ed Wilson was 20, and he was one of 6 players from the 47 Topeka High School baseball team to play professionally. I've listed those out there. Dick McConnell, Ed Wilson, Howard Mace, Poole, and Richard Burkhart all played for the Owls at one time. Frank Logan and Harlan Kaufman played professionally, but not for the Owls. They played other places. Ed Wilson won 18 games for the Miami Owls in 48, which had replaced the Chanute Owls as Topeka's farm club, and he was 6-3 with the Topeka Owls in 49. That was the only year that he would play for the Topeka Owls. And he spent 5 years playing minor league ball for other teams. Age 21, Alex Reese from Kansas pitched just 1 year with the Topeka Owls. He also pitched the previous year with the Miami Owls. His sons, Kevin and Brad, who live here in rural Topeka, provided me with the photos of their father and told me at Miami he lost his first 5 games before winning 6 straight. And with Topeka, Grease won 9 against 11 losses. Following his baseball career, Grease worked at Topeka's Air Force Depot and DuPont plant and officiated games and coached his son's baseball and basketball teams. And this fits a pattern for most of these players who, after their playing days were done, turned to coaching and passing on their love of baseball and sports in general to the next generation. 1950 was the year Mickey Mantle played in Topeka, not for the Owls, but for the Joplin Miners. He was only 18 years of age when the average age in the league was 22, but he was a prodigious talent in his second year of professional baseball. His first year was at Independence, Kansas in the KOM League. In 1951, he would open the season in Yankee Stadium playing center field for the New York Yankees. But in 1950, he was the shortstop for the Joplin Miners. And at the end of the year, he was voted MVP of the league. I put his stats up there, pretty impressive for an 18-year-old kid, but also put up Butch Neiman's because he was just about as good, and he was, at the time, 32 years of age. Years later, after Mickey was an established star in the major leagues, a Topeka sports writer asked him what he remembered about playing in Topeka, and Mickey said, "I remember the guy playing the organ." Well, that was Ole Lifgren. So Ole made an impact. There were 2 Topeka High graduates, Richard Burkhart and Howard Mace Poole, who made the Owls team in 1950. And as best I can tell, they're not in this photo of the 1950 team. It's all autographed by them. I see Jack Dean and Richard Palmami and Bob Lee in there, but I don't see Burkhart or Poole in there. Mace Poole was born in Circleville, but he played on that 47 Topeka High School baseball team that won the state championship. And he played 4 years in the minor leagues, 2 with the Owls. Burkhart was born in Wichita and only played 1 year in professional baseball, but he split his time in 50 with the Owls and 2 other teams. This photo was taken in front of the right field fence, and there's a sign that says that from Morel Meatpacking that you hit the home run over the sign, you'll win a ham. And the story goes that both Bob Lee and Butch Neiman were not only proficient at hitting home runs, but hitting them over the sign there, so that their families had plenty of ham to eat. 1950 was also the year that a 19-year-old from Springfield, Missouri entered the Western Association with the Springfield Cubs. Had nothing to do with Speak Owls other than he played against the Owls, but Bob Speak would go on to play 4 years in the major leagues with the Chicago Cubs and the San Francisco Giants. And a few years after his baseball career ended, he found his way to Topeka, where he joined with Tim Merle to build American Investors Life Insurance Company. And a couple of years ago, he was inducted in the Shawnee County Baseball Hall of Fame. 1951 was a big year for the Topeka Owls. They finally had a working agreement with a major league team, the Chicago Cubs. They'd been independent up to this point. And the Cubs sent 2 African-American ball players, Solly Drake and Milt Bohannon, both age 20, to Topeka. In this photo, Bohannon is kneeling at the far left, and Solly Drake is right in the middle of the photo, right behind the bat boy. Bohannon didn't do much with the Owls, but Drake did. Drake was from Little Rock, Arkansas, and he had had experience playing against former Negro League ball players in the Mandak League, players such as Satchel Paige and Double Duty Ratcliffe. And this was his first team, his first year in actual professional baseball with a team. He started slow at the plate, but as the season went on, he was hitting .383 in mid-May and led the league in triples. But he also got his draft notice from the Army and was supposed to report for induction on June 1st. He was able to get that deferred until mid-August. And on August 19th, he played his last game with the Owls. And at the time, he was leading the team in hitting at .324 and led the league in triples. The Owls fans in attendance on that day took up a collection and presented Solly Drake with $191.51 as a send-off gift. And despite finishing the season a few weeks early, Solly Drake was selected to the Western Association All-Star team. And when the Owls were awarded the league championship, his teammates voted him a full share from the league's championship pool. I recently spoke with Solly Drake, who just celebrated his 90th birthday and who's living in Los Angeles. He told me he had nothing but good memories about playing in Topeka. He said that he and Milt Bohannon roomed together and lived with a local family whose name he does not recall. But he said the teammates and the fans treated him well, and he doesn't remember any problems at all. This was 4 years after Jackie Robinson broke the color barrier in Major League Baseball, and Drake and Bohannon were the first African Americans to play on a Topeka-based professional baseball team in the modern era. Drake's recollection of his time in Topeka probably has faded a little bit over the years, because in a newspaper column written just after he left the team in August of '51, Topeka sports writer Dick Snyder quoted Drake as saying, "This league is full of handicaps for me, and you know what I mean by that. But the important thing is that I'm playing baseball." And he did tell me that it's all he wanted to do was to play baseball. He just loved baseball. Butch Neiman, the manager, was quoted as saying that the team had to make accommodations for Bohannon and Drake for housing and transportation when they traveled to Muskogee and Joplin. And Drake handled the comments he heard from the fans about his race with grace, saying to the sports writer back in '51, "Sure, sometimes I get mad at what they say and do, but most of the time I'm amazed that grown people could act the way some of them do and say what they say." After Solly Drake's baseball days were over, and he did play 2 years in the major leagues. After his baseball days were over, he was hired by Prudential Insurance, and he became the first African-American salesman west of the Mississippi. A few years later, he answered the call to the ministry after graduating from Fuller Theological Seminary in Pasadena, California, and he served as pastor of the Greater Ebenezer Baptist Church in Los Angeles for over 40 years. And just last month, October 23rd, he celebrated his 90th birthday. Of course, 1951 was the year of the flood, and the Owls fell run of it. Their stadium was buried underwater, and their home games had to be moved elsewhere. Photo on the left shows the ballpark in relation to the closely in Topeka, and the photo on the right is taken from the center field fence, and all you can see is water. And it had covered both of the dugouts and quite a bit of bandstand. They played a couple of their games. They moved them to Highland Park High School and even played a home game in Holton, Kansas, and a home series against the Celina team in McPherson, Kansas. Their ballpark suffered significant damage, and they couldn't control the sale of tickets at the other ballparks. So their owner, Link Norris, at that time was resorted to passing the hat through the stands during the games. And by July 24th, Norris was asking the league to extend the season by 2 weeks in order to make up the games. But his proposal was voted down by the other teams because they were losing money and it would have just prolonged and increased their losses. So as a consolation, they canceled the Shaughnessy Playoffs, but they gave the championship to Topeka because they were leading in the league standings at the time. In 1952, the Chicago Cubs continued to provide money and players to the Owls, and they sent a manager to skipper the team, A.J. Matty Matulis, who was a pitcher and a hitter. But on August 3rd, he was replaced as manager by Jack Dean. The Owls were in second place at the time, but they'd lost 7 out of 9 games, and their attendance had really suffered. They only drew just under 65,000 that year, which was the first year they averaged less than 1,000 per game. It was also the last year of the 5 years that Richard Palmami pitched for the Owls. And in fact, local players were being phased out of the Owl lineup because the Owls were no longer an independent team, able to sign anyone at any time. The working agreement with Chicago Cubs, of course, required the Cubs players be played and developed. There was an interesting player on the roster of the Celina Blue Jays. 18-year-old Bert Convey was in his second year of pro baseball, and this would be his last. He would return to his native Los Angeles and become a well-known actor, game show host, and panelist. In 1953, the Owls entered into a working agreement with the Chicago White Sox, who designated Ira Hutchinson to serve as manager. They got the attendance back up over 1,000 per game at 81,000 that year. They finished third in the Western Association, but they were again eliminated in the Shaughnessy Playoffs. And Jack Dean, the last of the local players on the Owls, won 19 games for the Owls that year and lost 7. In 1954, Ira Hutchinson was back as manager, and he was named Manager of the Year. Attendance fell again. It was down to under 60,000, about 800 per game. He finished first in the Western Association playoffs to Blackwell, Oklahoma Broncos. I've poured over this photo. All of the players are from elsewhere, as best I can tell. I couldn't find any local players in there. I put together an attendance chart that shows how the Owls, Hawks, and Reds records were over the years. You can see it started out pretty high, well over 100,000 for most of the years up until the 50s, when it started falling a little bit. In 1956, it got back up over 100,000, and I'll explain why in just a minute. But it again dwindled, and there were events happening in professional baseball that put a real squeeze on the minor leagues. I showed you earlier that the leagues had dropped a number from 43 down to 21 to now there's 10 minor leagues today. The Boston Braves in 1953, for example, moved from Milwaukee to become the Milwaukee Braves. In Boston, they'd only drawn 300 fans, but in Milwaukee, they drew 1.8 million fans their first year. In 54, the Philadelphia Athletics moved to Kansas City and became the Kansas City A's. And by 58, Brooklyn Dodgers and New York Giants had relocated to both Los Angeles and San Francisco. And by the end of the 54 season, Link Norris was saying he was out of the Western Association for the next year, and he was trying to sell the ball club. And in fact, the league, the Western Association, did
Volume. Volume.
They drew about 1.4 million fans that year in Kansas City, which was third best in the league. In 1956, Topeka found itself back in the minor leagues. An opening occurred in the Class A Western League. Wichita moved to the American Association, and Topekans jumped at the opportunity to move from Class C to Class A baseball. And this is a great story that says a lot about Topeka at that time. A not-for-profit corporation, Topeka Community Baseball Incorporated, was established on a Tuesday in January. And by Wednesday, they'd sold over 10,000 shares of stock to hundreds of citizens at $10 per share. That's my share of stock there that my dad bought for me. of Topeka Community Baseball Inc. Phil Gibson, president of Ray Beers, was named chairman of the fundraising campaign, which raised $65,000 of capital and sold $55,000 worth of advanced tickets. And just some of the examples of how the community pulled together. Furniture retailer Ed Marling stepped up and bought $1,000 worth of stock and $1,000 worth of tickets. 13-year-old Bob Swan sold 10 shares of stock during what was called a one-boy campaign in his neighborhood. And 3 telephone unions organized a telephone calling operation with over 100 volunteers to go through the 131-page telephone book soliciting stockholders. So that was an early attempt at a robocalling here in Topeka to solicit stockholders for Topeka Community Baseball Incorporated. As part of the baseball drive, the corporation was able to get the Small Business Administration to foreclose on the baseball stadium, satisfy the government liens, and then they could acquire the stadium from them. And they did. They renamed it Community Park. And in March, the stockholders chose the new name for the team, the Hawks. One of the key things for the Hawks that year, this is the year that they went back over 100,000 fans, was that they were able to get their schedule set up, their 70 home games, so that many of the home games were set when the Kansas City A's would be on the road. They'd set up a relationship with the Milwaukee Braves. And so they were a true farm club of the Milwaukee Braves. The 1956 Hawks featured several players who went on to the major leagues. And I've circled some of them here on the photo I want to talk about. In the back row standing up is Sherman Jones, and I'll talk a little bit more about him in a minute. Then the next fellow that's circled is Marshall the Sheriff Bridges. He pitched in the majors for 7 years, and his best year was 62 when he pitched for the Yankees and won 8 games and saved 18 games. Next to him is a catcher named Sammy Taylor, who spent 6 years in the majors. And of course, I circled Phil Gibson because he's the local fellow that raised all the money for this. In the front row, kneeling is the trainer, Ralph Salvon. And I circled him because he made it to the major leagues as well as a trainer for the Baltimore Orioles when Earl Weaver was the manager of the Orioles. And so I thought he was worthy of recognition as well. And there in the middle, kneeling is Chuck Cottier. Chuck Cottier enjoyed a 9-year major league career with 4 teams and a stint as manager of the Seattle Mariners over a 3-year period. He's currently an advisor to the general manager of the Washington Nationals. And over on the right, I've showed the 8 teams that were in this Western League. They're a far-flung league, stretching all the way from Des Moines and Sioux City in the east, all the way out to Albuquerque on the west. And I want to talk a little bit about Sherman Jones, who was from North Carolina, and he pitched for 3 teams in his 3-year major league career. 4 years after playing for the Hawks, Jones was playing in Class AAA for Tacoma of the Pacific Coast League. And every good ball player needs a nickname, and Sherman Jones got his nickname while he was playing for Tacoma. He had a record of 10 wins and no losses, and he was a pitcher that seemed to call on so often to stop a losing streak that a local sports writer gave him the nickname Roadblock. So in 1961, Sherman Roadblock Jones made it to the major leagues. He was a member of the Cincinnati Reds pitching staff, and he got to pitch in the World Series. Before the 1962 season, Sherman Roadblock Jones was drafted to be a member of the original New York Mets, one of the worst teams in baseball history, even worse than the Kansas City A's. When the Mets played their home opener in New York, Jones was the pitcher who got the ball, and he's the answer to another trivia question. Who got the first hit for the Mets in their home opener? Well, it was their pitcher, Sherman Roadblock Jones, who singled in the 3rd inning. Jones's baseball career ended soon thereafter as he lost 4 games to start the season and was sent back to the minor leagues. After he was through with baseball, Sherman Roadblock Jones and his wife, who was from Atchison and who I suspect he met while he was playing in Topeka, they moved to Kansas City, Kansas, where he joined the KCK Police Department. And after 22 years with the police department, he retired and ran for a seat in the Kansas legislature, which he won. He served in the Kansas House of Representatives from 1989 to 1992, and then in the Kansas Senate from 1993 to 2001. One of the pieces of legislation he sponsored involved the establishment of the Kansas African American Commission. And it was written about Sherman Roadblock Jones that as a KCK police officer, he set up roadblocks but as a legislator, he worked to remove roadblocks. That's Sherman Roadblock Jones, former Topeka Hawk. In 1957, the Hawks finished third out of the 8 teams, and in 58, the Hawks finished 7th out of 8 teams. The record was getting worse. In 1958, a local insurance man, Sherman Huff, was elected president of Topeka Community Baseball League. And I wish we had video of this. I'd put it on my PowerPoint and show it to you, but I don't. On opening night, Sherman Huff sang a song that he had written for the occasion, "We're for the Hawks." And he had 20 young ladies in short shorts dancing on the field behind him. The 58 schedule had 38 dates that conflicted with the Kansas City A's home dates. And as a result, the attendance suffered. They had on the field losses, they had off the field losses. And as with the old Western Association that folded after the 54 season, after the 58 season, the Western League folded. And one of the reasons given was that the cities were so far spread out, the ball players were having to take really long bus rides, and their major league clubs didn't approve of them being on the bus that long. For example, it's about 1,000 miles from Des Moines to Albuquerque, and by bus, that's about 15 hours. That's a long bus ride. Sherman Huff, though, as charged of Topeka Community Baseball Inc., petitioned for Topeka to join the 3I League, and by December, Topeka, Sioux City, Des Moines, and Lincoln were accepted into the 3I League, and Topeka was working out an agreement with the Cincinnati Reds. And in 1959, there were 2 stars on the team. It was still known as the Hawks that first year that Cincinnati had a relationship with us. But the 2 stars were, first off, Johnny Vandermeer, the manager. Now, he wasn't a playing manager. He was just the manager. But he's done something that no one's ever done before him or since, and he threw 2 consecutive no-hitters in 1938 while pitching for the Cincinnati Reds. And he was used not only as a manager, but also as a pitching guru by Cincinnati, because the other star on that team was a fellow by the name of Jim Maloney. He was a high school shortstop in Fresno, California, who Cincinnati drafted and thought that he could be developed into a pitcher. And so they sent him to Topeka to work with Johnny Vandermeer. In his first year, Jim Maloney was 6-7 in Topeka. He had a 4.50 ERA, but in Topeka and a couple other stops before he got to Cincinnati, he learned how to pitch. And eventually he did become the ace of the Cincinnati staff, twice winning 20 games in his 12-year major league career. He had a 9-inning no-hitter and a 10-inning no-hitter, and he lost a no-hitter in the 11th inning of a game. But while in Topeka, he met his first wife, Carolyn Doherty, who was a Washburn College student who he met on a blind date. They were married in 1961. They're now divorced. They have 3 children. That's Carolyn, who is second from left in the photo of the Reds players' wives. That is Tony Perez's wife, Carolyn, Doherty Maloney, Veda Pinson's wife, and Pete Rose's first wife, Carolyn, in the photo. Tommy Harper played for the Topeka Reds in 1960 and 1961 when he was the MVP of the 3I League. He was one of the best players ever to play in Topeka. His best catch, though, while he was in Topeka, was probably his wife, Bonnie Jean Williams of Topeka, who he married in 1962. Bonnie was the daughter of Vivian and Carl Williams of Topeka. And that's her on the right. And on the left is one of these hokey photos that appeared in the newspaper all across the country in advance of spring training, showing that Tommy Harper is staying in shape by letting his wife pitch to him in the backyard of their home in Berkeley, California, while he takes bunting practice. And so that's Tommy and his wife, Bonnie. I've been asked, how did people get chosen to be the bat boy for the teams? Well, the newspaper, the Journal, held a contest every year. Boys had to submit an essay on the topic, "Why I Want to Be Topeka's Bat Boy." The paper then selected 5 boys and printed a ballot for readers to submit. And the boy with the most votes won and was the bat boy for the Topeka home team. The second place finisher was the bat boy for the visitors. So in 1960, I got my older brother Chuck to write an essay, and lo and behold, he was selected as a finalist, and he won the contest. So that's my brother right there in the middle of the photo there. Mike Glotzbach finished second, and he served as the bat boy for the visitors. And so in 1961, the Reds hired a new general manager, Dave Rosenfield. And when he was asked if he wanted to do a bat boy contest at the start of the year, he said, no, we'll just get the kid from last year. So he called Chuck, who by then had discovered girls and cars and the like. And he said, and my brother said, no, but my brother will do it. So that's how I became the Reds bat boy in 1961. And Dave Rosenfield asked me if I had a buddy who I could get to help me out and serve as bat boy for the visitors. I said, well, yeah, I do. In fact, his name's Buddy McCune. And so the photo of the 61 Reds there in the front row, way on the left, sitting down is 12-year-old me. And on the far right is Bud McCune. And we served as the bat boys for that year. And 4 years ago in 2016, that team, the 61 Reds, was inducted in the Shawnee County Baseball Hall of Fame. And that's Bud and me at the ceremony, displaying the jerseys that we were wearing in this photo. Those are the jerseys we actually wore. My number was 1/2. His number was 1. And we actually fit into those jerseys. In fact, they were a little big for us, I think, at the time. But either they've shrunk or we've gotten bigger over the years. So in minor league baseball just became even more difficult after 1961. Teams needed a league to play in, and they needed a major league club to keep them afloat and provide them players. And unfortunately, at the end of 61, the 3I League folded, and Topeka's hopes for a ball team in years after 1961 folded along with it, even though Cincinnati indicated it was willing to continue its relationship with Topeka. It's heartbreaking to me to think what might have been in 1962, because the Topeka Reds probably would have had a first baseman named Tony Perez, who is in the Baseball Hall of Fame, a second baseman named Pete Rose, who probably should be in the Hall of Fame, and an outfielder named Lee May, who is in the Cincinnati Reds Hall of Fame, all of whom would soon become major parts of what would be known as the Big Red Machine, one of the best teams in baseball in the 60s and 70s. So that is my presentation regarding baseball over these years. Let me see if I can stop the share, and I will open the floor to any questions that anybody may have. I can't believe I covered it that thoroughly.
Well, Doug, it doesn't sound like anybody has any questions.
I might have put them all to sleep. I hope I didn't.
Well, no, it looks like just about everybody stayed on for the whole presentation. So that was very interesting to me. It was very thorough. I came into this with a bunch of questions and you answered all of them.
Good.
It was time well spent.
I just wanted to comment that you know, I went to, I don't know, probably a dozen games or so in those years, and there was just there were a lot of times, you know, of some of the things that you said, Doug, that I go, oh yeah, that I mean, just like, wow. And so it was very well orchestrated, you know, everything that you had down and in all of the information there. And that was real informative. But I don't have any questions really.
Hey, Doug,
Yes.
where was the
are
community
available.
park at?
Community
Location.
Park was at the southeast corner of North Topeka Boulevard and Lyman Road. The Dairy Queen is still there. There was a Dairy Queen there at the time. It's been remodeled over the years, and the China Inn was right there on Topeka Boulevard.
Right, that's right.
And so the park was just immediately east of those two establishments. It's where Westlake Ace Hardware is now.
All right, okay.
Weren't all the other ballparks there too? No?
Well, it was all the same park. They just renamed
oh,
it. It started
okay,
off as Mitchell
alright.
Park, then it became Al Park, and then it was Community Park, but it's the same
Okay.
park.
Okay, that's what I was thinking.
The
Okay.
same one that got flooded in 51.
Yep.
Our Mike Therese comes after all the Topeka teams, right?
Well, Mike Therese never played for the Owls. He graduated from Topeka High in 1964, and he was then drafted by the St. Louis Cardinals, or signed by the St. Louis Cardinals. I'm not sure there was a draft at the time. I think he was just signed out of high school by the St. Louis Cardinals and played in their minor league system and made it first off as a pitcher for the Cardinals, and had quite a successful baseball career. He was back just a couple years ago, and he was in the first group that was inducted in Shawnee County Baseball Hall of Fame. But he was back to give the keynote address showing off his Yankee ring from the years that they won the World Series and that kind of thing.
Hmm.
Great guy.
Doug, this is Jerry Goodell.
Hi, Jerry.
My dad did own a very small piece of that Big Owls, I think in the late 40s. And I
Mom,
attended,
I let you in.
yeah. Am I in?
Yeah, go ahead, Jerry.
I remember a lot. I remember a lot of those names that you brought up. Brings back a lot of good old memories.
Hopefully your dad got out before he lost a lot of money, because it looked like there were times when the teams made money, but towards the end they suffered some losses, it looks like.
I think he took his ownership as a legal fee, so I don't think he lost money.
Tax deduction.
Mark Marling told me at one point a couple of years ago that that his dad Ed Marling, his grandfather Ed Marling, was one of the major benefactors of the Reds, but they were so successful in '61 that he got some of his money back, and he probably would have gotten all of his money back if they played one more year.
Yeah.
Anybody else have anything they want to say? Thanks, Doug, for this presentation.
You're welcome, Tim.
Yeah, that's
Thank
good.
you all for participating.
Thanks, Doug.
Mhm.
Enjoyed it.
Okay.
Thanks, Doug and Bob.
Thank you all for being with us. We'll, I believe, have another presentation next Sunday. I believe it's on colored fruits. But we'll promote that in the next few days. Thank you all.
Thank you.
I was trying to